Ever wonder how tiny particles get, turbocharged to near light speed out there in space?
It's pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the energy in supernovae, cosmic rays.
Yeah,
It's just mind-boggling.
absolutely.
Well, that exact question is what we're diving into today.
Sounds good.
Our mission, basically, is to unpack a really interesting recent scientific breakthrough. We've got a news article detailing it, and it seems to shed some serious light on this whole cosmic acceleration thing.
Yeah, and what's really exciting, I think, is that researchers in China have actually managed to recreate a key cosmic process right here on Earth.
In the lab.
In the lab, yeah. They've really zoomed in on how ions, those charged particles, get that first big energy boost from what are called collisionless shocks.
Okay, collisionless shocks. That term itself sounds a bit strange. How can you have a shock without collisions?
That's a great question. And it really gets to the heart of why these things in space are so, well, powerful and kind of mysterious.
Right.
See, unlike shocks you might think of, like, I don't know, a sonic boom or something, where air molecules are bumping into each other,
Yeah.
in space, these shocks happen in plasmas. Superheated gas where everything's ionized, charged.
Ah, okay. Charged particles.
Exactly. And because they're charged, they interact through electromagnetic fields.
Yeah.
Over pretty long distances, actually, not by physically hitting each other.
Huh. So it's more like fields pushing fields.
Sort of. Think of it maybe like boats making wakes in water. The boats don't have to hit each other to create a big disturbance, right?
Yeah, I get that analogy.
These electromagnetic wakes in the plasma are the collisionless shocks, and they can carry a ton of energy.
So these shocks are like invisible force fields just shoving particles up to crazy speeds.
That's a pretty good way to put it, yeah.
Precisely.
And for decades now, scientists have been trying to figure out exactly how these shocks give particles that initial energy boost.
The first step, kind of?
Exactly. The kickstart they need for, further acceleration that eventually creates things like cosmic rays.
And there were different ideas about how that works.
Right. Two main contenders, really, for this initial acceleration stage. One's called shock drift acceleration, or SDA.
Okay, yes.
And the other is shock surfing acceleration, SSA.
Shock drift. Shock surfing. Okay, they sound like extreme sports for particles.
Yeah.
What's the actual difference between them?
Yeah, they do sound a bit like that. Well, imagine a surfer catching an ocean wave, right?
Sure.
Shock surfing SSA, the idea there was that ions could potentially get sort of trapped right at the very front of the shock.
Riding the wave?
Exactly, riding along with it and gaining energy as the shock moves.
Okay. And shock drift.
Shock drift SDA, that's a bit different. It suggests ions gain energy more by, bouncing or reflecting off the shock front.
Bouncing off it.
Yeah, because of the electromagnetic fields there, they sort of drift along the electric field that's created by the moving magnetic field in the shock itself.
Interesting. So one's riding on it, the other's bouncing off it, but both speed the particle up.
Pretty much, yeah. That was the idea.
Now, the article mentions these Chinese researchers. University of Science and Technology of China, right? They actually saw this happening in their lab.
That's the amazing part.
How on earth did they manage that?
Yeah.
Recreating something that happens near a supernova sounds incredibly ambitious.
It absolutely is ambitious. And their method was, well, pretty ingenious. They used the Shenguang-II laser facility in China.
Okay, big lasers again.
Very big lasers. They essentially created a miniature version of one of these astrophysical shocks. First, they used the lasers to make a magnetized plasma, sort of mimicking the space environment.
Right.
Then they used more laser power to launch another blob of plasma moving really fast into the first one. This acted like a piston.
A plasma piston.
Yeah. And when this fast piston plasma slammed into the stationary magnetized plasma at hundreds of kilometers per second, mind you, it generated what's called a supercritical shock. And this shock looked very, very similar to the kind we see out in space, like even the one near Earth, our bow shock.
A supercritical shock. Okay, what does supercritical mean here? Is that just like really strong?
Yeah, essentially. It means the shock is strong enough that it actually reflects a significant chunk of the incoming ions back upstream.
Ah, okay. And that reflection is important.
It's crucial for the shock drift idea, the SDA mechanism we were talking about.
Got it. So they made this mini shock.
Mm-hmm.
could they actually see the ions getting accelerated? How do you even watch that?
They could. They use some pretty advanced diagnostics, things like optical interferometry to see the shock's structure,
Okay.
and also ion time of flight detectors. These basically measure how long it takes ions to travel a certain distance so you know their speed.
Clever. And what do they see?
They observe this really focused beam of high-speed ions shooting upstream from the shock.
Upstream, so against the flow.
Exactly. Moving way faster than the shock itself, actually. Thousands of kilometers per second.
Wow.
And crucially, the way these ions behaved, their energy, their direction, it matched observations we have from space, particularly around Earth's bow shock.
So tiny lab shock acts just like a giant space shock. That's incredible. But how did they know for sure it was the drifting and not the surfing, SDA versus SSA?
Right. That's the key distinction they needed to make. And that's where computer simulations came in. Specifically, something called particle in cell, or PIC, simulations.
Okay, simulations. Like a virtual experiment.
Exactly, but incredibly detailed. Instead of just seeing the overall result, these simulations let you track like individual virtual particles. You can see precisely how each one interacts with the electromagnetic fields at every point near the shock.
So you can actually see if it's surfing or bouncing.
You got it. And what their simulations showed, matching the experimental data, was that the ions were mainly getting their energy boost during that reflection process by interacting with what's called the shock's motional electric field.
Motional electric field. Remind me what that is again?
That's the electric field that exists because you have a magnetic field moving along with the shock front. It's a fundamental electromagnetic effect.
Okay, so the ions bounce, interact with that moving field.
Get accelerated by both the electric and magnetic components, and boom, you get that high-speed beam they measured. It was a clear signature of SDA, shock drift acceleration.
And the article specifically said this ruled out SSA as the dominant process. That sounds pretty definitive after such a long debate.
It's a very significant result, yes, because previous lab experiments trying to study this, well, they often had limitations. Maybe the magnetic fields weren't quite right, or the plasma conditions didn't fully match space.
Right. Hard to get everything perfect.
Exactly. But this experiment, they really managed to control the magnetic field strength and the plasma parameters very carefully. They created a shock that was much more directly comparable to real astrophysical ones.
Bridging that gap.
Precisely. Bridging the gap between the lab and space. And the fact that their results, both the measurements and the simulations, so clearly pointed to SDA being the main driver for that initial kick, it provides really strong evidence. It helps settle that long-standing question.
So, okay, going back to the big picture then. Supernovae, cosmic rays. How does knowing SDA is the key initial mechanism change how we understand that stuff? Does it tell us more about, say, what kinds of particles get accelerated or what the conditions are like inside these massive accelerators?
It definitely helps refine the models now that astrophysicists have this strong confirmation for SDA as the injection mechanism.
The injection, like getting particles into the main acceleration process.
Yeah, exactly. Getting them up to a certain threshold energy so that other, potentially even more powerful mechanisms can take over later. Knowing SDA is the key first step allows them to build more accurate models of how energy is transferred from the shock into the particles.
So better physics in the models.
Right. It helps them predict, for instance, the efficiency of particle acceleration in different environments, like supernova remnants. It helps interpret the data we get from telescopes looking at these objects, understand the composition of the cosmic rays that eventually reach us. It makes the picture clearer.
Okay, so we've got this picture. Researchers create a mini cosmic shock. They watch the particles. They confirm it's mostly this shock drift thing giving the first energy boost. That's the science bit. But let's talk about the so what. Why should someone listening right now care about ions bouncing off plasma wakes?
That is always the crucial question, isn't it? Well, on the fundamental side, like we were just saying, understanding this process is key to figuring out where the highest energy particles in the universe come from.
Cosmic rays bombarding Earth.
Yep. They carry messages from the most violent events out there, supernovae, active galaxies, stuff like that. This research helps us decode those messages by understanding the very first step in their journey. It unlocks secrets about how these massive cosmic engines work.
So understanding the particle baby steps tells us about the giant leaps they take across the universe. Makes sense. But wasn't there also something about more down-to-earth applications mentioned? Fusion energy, laser accelerators.
Absolutely. And this is often how science works, right? Studying something fundamental leads to unexpected practical benefits.
Yeah.
The techniques they develop just building this controllable, tunable shock platform in the lab. That itself is a powerful new tool.
How so?
Well, think about developing laser-driven ion accelerators. These have potential uses in things like medicine, maybe proton therapy for cancer or industry.
Right.
Controlling the quality and focus of those ion beams is really important. This research hints that by carefully using magnetic fields, similar to how they control them in the experiment, you might be able to make those beams much better, much more useful.
Huh. So studying space shocks could lead to better cancer treatment. That's quite a link.
It's definitely a potential pathway. And then there's inertial confinement fusion.
Trying to get energy from fusion like in the sun.
Exactly. Using powerful lasers to crush tiny fuel pellets.
Yeah.
Shockwaves are a big part of that process, but they can also cause instabilities, things that mess up the compression and stop fusion from happening efficiently.
Ah, the shocks can be disruptive.
They can. So having a better handle on how ions behave in these intense shock environments, which this kind of research provides, it could lead to new ways to control those instabilities, make fusion more efficient.
Okay, so from decoding cosmic ray origins to possibly improving clean energy and medical tech.
Yeah.
That's a pretty broad impact from simulating a tiny piece of a supernova.
It really is. It highlights how interconnected things are. You ask a fundamental question about, how the universe works at its most extreme.
Yeah.
And the answers can ripple out and potentially help us solve problems right here on Earth. It really shows the power of doing these careful laboratory experiments to probe cosmic physics.
It definitely does. And it makes you think, now that we've seen this basic cosmic acceleration process recreated in a lab, what else is out there? What other, powerful space phenomena might we be able to simulate and understand better this way?
That's the exciting frontier, isn't it?
Yeah. Could we unlock even more revolutionary technologies or maybe find deeper insights into the universe's secrets just by getting better at bridging this gap between the lab and the cosmos? Definitely something to ponder.